Okay, so picture this. You're being pulled in two directions at once. On one side, you've got your most powerful new friend, and on the other, a historic partner you just can't afford to lose. Well, that's pretty much the tightrope India is walking right now. And it's this incredibly high-stakes balancing act that could honestly reshape global trade as we know it.
And where does this whole story kick off? Right here, with this declaration from the White House. It's a crystal clear, unambiguous line in the sand, right? They're basically promising a total shakeup of the Middle East.
Now, make no mistake, this was not just tough talk. This was the opening shot of a full-blown diplomatic and, economic campaign. The goal? To squeeze Iran from every possible angle.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The country facing one of the biggest, most complicated dilemmas from this U.S. policy, well, it wasn't even in the Middle East. Nope, it was thousands of miles away. The rising global power of India.
So, okay, this new era of pressure, what does that actually look like on the ground? I mean, what was the U.S. strategy here?
Well, the playbook was pretty comprehensive, to say the least. The goal was basically to completely isolate Iran. We're talking about targeting its oil revenue, its main source of cash, slapping sanctions on anyone, and I mean anyone who did business with them, and then using international forums to snap old sanctions back into place. The whole thing was designed to leave Tehran with almost nowhere to turn.
All right, so this brings us right back to India. Why on earth did a U.S. policy aimed squarely at Iran create such a massive headache for New Delhi? The answer, it all comes down to this incredible, delicate balancing act that India is trying to pull off. And this right here really gets to the heart of the whole dilemma. Just look at this. On one side, you've got India's growing alignment with the West. We're talking key partners like the U.S. and Israel. But on the other side, you have its own pressing needs for things like energy security and a strategic route into Central Asia. And both of those rely heavily on Iran. It is a classic, high-stakes tug of war.
You know, this all boils down to a core principle of Indian foreign policy. It's called strategic autonomy. And what does that mean? Well, it's the idea that India refuses to be boxed into any single alliance. It wants the freedom to be partners with both Washington and Tehran. But this U.S. pressure campaign, it's essentially forcing the question, can you really have it both ways?
So, the big question is, how does India even begin to navigate this? Well, at the very heart of its vision is a project that is frankly breathtaking in its ambition. It's a project they hope can somehow solve this massive geopolitical puzzle. It's called the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC for short. Now, this thing was first floated at the G20 summit. And let me be clear, this is not just another trade route. It's a huge US-backed geoeconomic statement. It's designed to be a direct competitor to China's own massive project, the Belt and Road Initiative. And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about here, just look at the economic firepower involved. The countries participating in this corridor have a combined GDP of, wait for it, $47 trillion. To put that in perspective, that is nearly half of the entire global economy. The potential here is just immense. So this is the grand vision, right? A brand new economic map for the 21st century. The whole idea is to position India not just as a regional player, but as a truly critical hub connecting Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. A linchpin, really. Okay, so how does this whole thing actually work? Well, it's a really smart combination of sea and land routes. First, goods ship from India over to the UAE. Then they get loaded onto a modern high-speed rail network that zips them across the Arabian Peninsula all the way to Israel's coast. From there, it's the final leg by sea to Europe. And the really big deal here, the key takeaway, this route could be up to 40% faster than the traditional one through the Suez Canal. That's a game changer.
But of course, a vision this grand is bound to run into some pretty harsh realities, right? And the IMEC project, it sits directly on top of some of the world's most sensitive, most volatile geopolitical fault lines.
First up, let's just talk about the economic reality. Look at this chart. Under previous U.S. sanctions, India's trade with Iran absolutely plummeted. It went from $17 billion down to just over $2 billion. That is a massive hit, losing a key energy and trade partner. And renewed pressure, well, that could pretty much wipe out what little is left. And this directly hits India's huge investment in Iran's Chabahar port. See, for India, this port isn't just some business deal. It's their only viable gateway to get goods into Afghanistan and Central Asia without having to go through their rival, Pakistan. And now, that entire strategic investment is suddenly at risk.
Now, to really get why a new route like IMEC is such a big deal,
why it's so revolutionary, you first have to understand the danger of something called geopolitical choke points.
And this right here is probably the most famous choke point in the world, the Strait of Hormuz. Think about this. A quarter of all the world's oil and nearly a third of its natural gas has to pass through this tiny, narrow waterway. And it's a waterway that Iran has, time and again, threatened to close. So a huge strategic advantage of IMEC is that it completely bypasses this vulnerability, creating a much more secure and reliable route for trade.
And the final, massive fault line we need to talk about is China. As you can see from these numbers, IMEC is definitely designed to counter Beijing's influence, but wow, the scale of that challenge is just enormous. China's trade with both the Gulf states and Iran absolutely dwarfs India's. That gives Beijing immense economic leverage in the exact region that IMEC needs to win over to be successful.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? With all these intense, competing pressures pulling it in different directions, how can India possibly navigate a path forward? And look, this isn't just about money and trade routes. It's a diplomatic minefield. For instance, India's deepening defense partnership with Israel, who is a key partner in IMEC, that creates real friction with its Arab partners. And that in turn complicates India's traditional role as a self-proclaimed leader of the global South. Ultimately, it tests the very trust you need to hold a massive, multinational project like this together.
I think this quote really nails the essence of the challenge. How India manages to keep engaging with Iran, even as it gets closer and closer with the United States, well, that's going to be the ultimate test of its ability to maintain that strategic autonomy we were talking about earlier.
So, in the end, India finds itself caught between this incredible, visionary corridor for the future and the messy, complicated geopolitical reality of right now. The question is, can it successfully walk that tightrope without the whole thing snapping? And that really leaves us with the big lingering question, doesn't it? In an increasingly divided world, is this kind of balancing act a sustainable strategy for the long run? Or is it just delaying an inevitable, very difficult choice? And honestly, that's a question not just for India, but for pretty much any nation trying to find its way in the 21st century.